Spain dominated everything: possession, shots, XG, and still could not score. Welcome to FairPlay, Football AI Review. This was Group H, Match Day 1 of the 2026 FIFA World Cup, played on June 15th at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta in front of 67,640 fans. The reigning European champions faced Cape Verde, a nation making their very first appearance at a World Cup finals. Nobody expected a draw. Everybody got one. Spain needed a winning start. They are the tournament favorites in this group alongside Uruguay, and dropping points on day one against a debutante nation immediately complicates their path. Cape Verde, meanwhile, were not simply hoping to avoid a hammering. They were organized, determined, and quietly confident after arriving from African qualification with genuine momentum behind them. The pre-match narrative was straightforward in theory. Spain came in with 6 consecutive wins through European qualifying, including a 6-0 demolition of Turkey and a 4-0 in Georgia. Their squad depth is elite, their system is refined, and Luis de la Fuente had every reason to expect a controlled performance against a side making their World Cup debut. Cape Verde coach Pedro Leitão Brito, however, had a very different plan in mind. Spain lined up in their familiar 4-3-3, with Unai Simon in goal behind a back four of Cucurella, Laporte, Cubarsí, and Marcos Llorente. The midfield triangle of Rodri, Fabian Ruiz, and Pedri provided the engine room, with Gavi, Oyarzabal, and Ferran Torres leading the attack. The intent was clear: positional dominance, short combinations, and gradual penetration through the thirds. Cape Verde deployed a compact 4-1-4-1, with the single pivot Kevin Pina anchoring the midfield and a narrow bank of 4 ahead of him. Ryan Mendes led the line alone with specific instructions: stay disciplined, hold the shape, and deny Spain space between the lines. Coach Brito understood that his side would not win a possession battle, so he never tried to fight one. The tactical mismatch was telling, but not in the way Spain anticipated. Cape Verde's narrow 4-1-4-1 sat deep and invited Spain to circulate the ball wide, then compressed laterally the moment a cross was attempted. With their defensive block so disciplined, Spain found themselves recycling possession endlessly without finding the decisive vertical pass. The mismatch was not in formation. It was in intention. Spain wanted to play through. Cape Verde wanted to absorb and suffocate. Spain controlled the early exchanges entirely. They won 11 corners across the 90 minutes and barely allowed Cape Verde out of their own half in the opening period. Pedri and Fabian Ruiz pulled the strings centrally, looking for Gavi and Oyarzabal in between the lines, but every gap closed quickly. Spain were commanding without being clinical, and that distinction would prove costly. The first yellow card of the match came in the 16th minute when Sidney Lopez Cabral was booked for a physical foul on Marcos Llorente. It was an early signal of Cape Verde's willingness to be combative. They made 17 tackles across the 90 minutes compared to Spain's 13, and it showed that Brito's side would not simply roll over when pressed. The moment that will be replayed for years came in the 39th minute. Ferran Torres found himself in a position he would score from 99 times out of 100, close range, goal gaping, and struck the crossbar. It was the loudest silence in the stadium, the defining sound of Spain's night, a single thud of metal that somehow contained the entire story of the match within it. Beyond the crossbar, goalkeeper Vozinha was the reason Spain did not score in the first half. The 40-year-old veteran produced a string of brilliant saves late in the opening period, denying Oyarzabal, Laporte, and Torres with stops of genuine quality. His reading of the game and his positioning were exceptional for someone operating at the very highest level for the first time. At halftime, the score was goalless, and the analysis was straightforward. Spain were creating chances but converting none, and their finishing was not matching their territorial authority. What was remarkable was Luis de la Fuente's decision not to make any changes at the interval. With Lamine Yamal, Nico Williams, and Dani Olmo waiting on the bench, the conservative approach was immediately questioned, and the second half would only deepen those questions. Spain began the second period with the same structure and the same frustrations. Cape Verde continued to defend in organized blocks, and without the freshness of their attacking options, Spain's movement became repetitive and predictable. The ball moved quickly, but the ideas became slow, and the crowd began to sense that something extraordinary might be unfolding. Pedro Brito made his move first. In the 61st minute, a triple substitution transformed Cape Verde's defensive posture. Willy Semedo, De Roy Duarte, and Nuno da Costa all entered simultaneously, replacing Jovan Cabral, Laros Duarte, and Dailon Livramento. It was a bold tactical refresh designed to restore energy in the press and cover the flanks more aggressively. It worked. De La Fuente responded in the 71st minute with his own double change, withdrawing Fabian Ruiz for Mikel Merino and replacing Gavi with Lamine Yamal. Merino brought physicality to the midfield press, but it was the introduction of Yamal that changed Spain's dynamic entirely. The young winger's directness and pace immediately created problems for Cape Verde's left side. Cape Verde made their fourth substitution in the 76th minute, bringing on Juan Paulo to replace the booked Sidney Lopez Cabral. 3 minutes later, Telmo Arcanjo came on for Jamiro Montero, further reinforcing the defensive block and adding fresh legs for the final push. Dani Olmo replaced Ferran Torres in the 81st minute, giving Spain a sharper technical option in the number 10 space. By this point, De La Fuente had also made the extraordinary decision to push centre-back Aymeric Laporte up into a false striker role, signaling total desperation. Spain had abandoned any pretense of tactical structure. This was raw chaos thrown forward in hope. In the 87th minute, Nico Williams came on for Rodri, the most telling substitution of the match. Removing your most important midfield anchor in the final minutes to add another attacker is an act of extreme necessity, and it left Spain completely exposed to the counter. That vulnerability almost cost them dearly. Marc Cucurella received the ball in a perfect position inside the box in the 83rd minute and headed it directly into the hands of Vozinha. It was a moment of almost comic wastefulness, made more painful given how desperate Spain were for any kind of breakthrough at that stage. Then came the most dramatic moment of the closing stages. Roberto Lopez threw himself in front of Oyarzabal's shot with a heroic last-ditch block, denying what would have been a near-certain goal. It was the kind of defending that earns a nation iconic status, a body thrown in front of a ball at the World Cup by a player who will not forget that moment for the rest of his life. But Cape Verde were not finished. Deep into stoppage time, with Nico Williams bombing forward and Spain completely exposed at the back, Dini Borges rose to meet a cross and headed goalward. Unai Simon saved it. Spain breathed again, and then Oyarzabal headed a final corner harmlessly wide before the final whistle triggered scenes of unbridled Cape Verdean joy. Pedri was shown a yellow card in the 92nd minute for a tactical foul halting a Cape Verde counterattack. It was a professional foul but a significant one. He will need to be careful about accumulating a suspension in a group stage where every point matters. The possession numbers tell you everything and nothing simultaneously. Spain had 74% of the ball, completed 734 accurate passes at 92% accuracy, and registered 27 shots to Cape Verde's 6. These are the statistics of a team that should have won comfortably. The scoreline tells a different story. Spain's expected goals figure of 2.65 is damning when placed against the actual output of 0. Ferran Torres striking the crossbar, Vozinha's 7 saves, Cucurella's tame header, and Oyarzabal's late effort blocked by Lopez. Spain created the chances but lacked the ruthlessness to convert even the most inviting of them. Cape Verde's expected goals of just 0.26 underlines how little they threatened, yet that Borges header laid on was genuinely dangerous. Defensively, Cape Verde were extraordinary. 17 tackles, disciplined shape, intelligent positioning, and a goalkeeper playing the game of his life. This was a defensive performance that any elite side would be proud of. Spain's 8 shots blocked speaks to how crowded their penalty area became every time a cross arrived. The defensive masterclass from Brito's side deserves recognition as one of the finest collective performances in this tournament's opening round. The player of the match conversation begins and ends with Vozinha. 7 saves at 40 years old, on the biggest stage football has to offer in his country's first-ever World Cup game. The crossbar Torres struck was not luck. Vozinha had already forced him wide once before that moment. He was authoritative, commanding, and produced the kind of performance that becomes national legend overnight. From Spain's perspective, the standout performer was Pedri. He completed the most passes in central areas, drove Spain's tempo, and drew fouls intelligently throughout. His reading of the game in tight spaces was excellent, and he was the one player who consistently created something from nothing. His late booking was out of character and a minor blemish on an otherwise composed display. The player who underperformed most obviously was Mikel Oyarzabal. Tasked with leading the line and providing the cutting edge, he was consistently wasteful in front of goal, heading the final corner wide and failing to convert any of the gilt-edge situations his team created. For a player of his quality operating with La Roja, this was a deeply underwhelming evening. Luis de la Fuente's decision not to make substitutions at halftime will be analyzed harshly, and rightly so. With one of the most exciting attacking benches in world football available to him, the choice to wait until the 71st minute before introducing Lamine Yamal was baffling. The young winger immediately offered Spain something different, and one cannot help but wonder what a full second half with him on the pitch might have produced. This was, remarkably, the first time these two nations have ever met at any level of competition, making the result all the more extraordinary. Cape Verde's history is short by international standards. They only began competing in the 1990s, but in Atlanta on June 15, 2026, they wrote the most significant chapter in their football story. This is not simply a point for them, it is a moment of national identity. Spain arrive at this World Cup off the back of 6 wins from their last 7 competitive matches, including that comprehensive 6-0 victory over Turkey in qualifying. But those performances came against nations they were expected to beat. This was the first real test, and the result has exposed a vulnerability in their finishing that will concern De La Fuente deeply ahead of Saudi Arabia and Uruguay. Cape Verde come into this World Cup with 2 wins and 3 draws from their last 5 matches, including a famous 1-0 victory over Cameroon. That form suggests a side with genuine defensive organization and the ability to grind out results. What they showed tonight is that their qualifying form was no fluke. They can perform at the very highest level. The Group H table after Matchday 1 shows Spain and Cape Verde level on 1 point each. Spain face Saudi Arabia next on June 21st, a match they will be expected to win, before a potentially decisive clash with Uruguay on June 27th. Cape Verde face Uruguay first, arguably the toughest game in the group, and then host Saudi Arabia. The draw means both Spain and Cape Verde absolutely need points from their remaining games, which makes those fixtures enormously high stakes. Spain will qualify from this group if they show up against Saudi Arabia and Uruguay with the clinical edge they lacked tonight. Their quality is undeniable. Their XG was 2.65 against a World Cup debutant, and that kind of pressure will eventually tell. Cape Verde's path is harder. They need to take something from Uruguay and then beat Saudi Arabia. And while tonight proves they are capable of extraordinary things, back-to-back results against top nations will test them to their absolute limit. This was a draw that felt like 2 completely different results depending on which flag you were wearing. For Spain, it was a failure of execution dressed in the language of misfortune. For Cape Verde, it was the validation of everything they have built, a disciplined, united, courageous performance that earned a point none of the pundits predicted. Stay with FairPlay, Football AI review as this World Cup continues to deliver the unexpected. Cape Verde's next appearance against Uruguay could be just as dramatic, and Spain's character will be tested against Saudi Arabia in ways this match only hinted at. The group is wide open, the stakes are climbing, and in a tournament of surprises, Group H just announced itself loudly. That's the FairPlay verdict on this one. If you want more analysis like this, follow us. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at FairPlay AI, and follow Anthony personally on X at Anthony Fairplay. See you next match.